Local productions seen on Delta College Public Media are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Junia Doan's The Spark. I'm Junia Doan, and thank you for joining us. My guest today is Paul Haselhuhn, president of Wiegand Tinkle Associates, architect firm based in Saginaw, Michigan. Welcome, Paul. We live in a world of architecture because we live indoors and we go to places that are indoors. But actually, what is architecture?
Well, thank you again for having me on the show today. That question is really a complex question. I can tell you that when I was back in school back in the 90s, which I know for many people that's not that long ago, that question was being asked and debated. And at that time, the question was: Is architecture more art or is it more science? What is it? What is it really? And I would guess that today's architecture schools are struggling with the same question, and it's always been a question. And architecture is really one of those things that takes a very unique individual to do. It takes an individual that's both left and right sided thinking in their brain. Where oftentimes certain careers, certain passions of ours, we tend to lean towards one side of the brain versus the other. Architecture really needs that analytical side and that creative side to come together. But that's sort of the technical thing. What is architecture really? In simple terms, it's the design of the built environment. And it's so much more than just buildings. It is it is everything we construct beyond nature. As architects, we have the privilege to be able to work with raw elements like stone, concrete, steel, wood materials. And we take these elements and we begin to form them to create place. We create environments which we as humans exist in. And that is architecture. And it's been broken up today into many different categories. There's many different engineering disciplines and specialty disciplines that handle very specific sets of types of architecture. But really, it is that whole built environment. That is architecture. And if we don't do it well, it's something that can have an impact on us as humans. So that's sort of a round or a big, 30,000 foot view of what I think architecture is.
But there seems to be not fads, but over the centuries, different design features to uh, um, be popular. I don't mean be popular, but anyway. But then a few decades later, it's over.
Yeah.
And you could say it was, in our times, it was dealt by cost, availability. We didn't have the artisans. But is there sort of an established life of beauty and appeal, and then it gets superseded by some other interpretation?
Architecture really, one of the unique things that I've learned through my career is architecture has a myriad of factors that have put pressure on the the task that we do. And it can be, as you said, economics, it can be certain needs, it can be, where we're at in society. I mean, in the last 20 years, I'll even go back further than that, the last 30 years, sustainability and that thought process and how it impacts architecture has, it's not a new thought, but has been revived. And it's interesting when you ask about the history of architecture, I said sustainability has been revived. But if you think about architecture through the history or through history, it really has always been about sustainability. through the majority of its history. There were times when we did not have mechanical air conditioning or lighting in a building, or we didn't have heating in a building that we could put in artificially through furnaces and stuff. And so architecture itself had to find ways to warm the occupants, to provide light to the occupants, to keep them cool on hot days. And we were able to do that. We understood how to harness nature to be able to do those things. As time has progressed, architecture has evolved with technology and how society's changed, and we've adapted those things. What sort of happened to us in the middle part of the century, though, we'll talk through the 60s, 70s, sort of 80s time frame, is we forgot about those natural things because energy got cheap, was cheap. We were developing all these great things, and we were putting air conditioning into buildings and then closing them in glass, and we didn't realize how much energy they were really taxing on our system. And I will be the first to say, as architects, we've made a lot of mistakes, um, but we learn from them. And it's always that way when you're pioneering something new. Some things you're going to do are going to be very beneficial. Some things are going to have impacts that we don't necessarily perceive when we're doing it. And when we put all these things in these buildings, we weren't perceiving the taxes that it was going to put on us as society to be able to draw, be taken away from those natural things, oil and gas and energy and all those types of things. But we're understanding that now. And again, these past 30 years, I've seen in my career some huge changes in how buildings utilize energy. And we're going back to thinking about what way do we make the building face so we can harness the sun. I'm in Michigan versus Texas, so how do I design a building different here than I would in the South? And there are things that we will do differently in each of those sort of environments because it's what's appropriate for that building.
Has the concept of beauty been replaced by just what you talked about, sustainability?
That's a really good question. Uh, so, architecture in and of itself is interesting from the standpoint that form is very simple. We have, and you can go back to mathematics and shapes. We have circles, spheres, straight lines, we have triangles. We have these basic shapes that, as architects, we sort of compile together into this built environment. What's really interesting about that is I heard somebody say this years ago, and it's true. God never designed in a straight line. But we tend to because we have pencils and computers and whatever it is and rulers, and we make a lot of straight lines or pretty curved lines and stuff like that. But um, how architecture becomes beautiful is an interesting question, and it's one that I think history has always played a part in what that beauty is. So as we learn new technologies, as we learn to work with different materials, we tried to figure out how to make those materials part of our buildings, part of our built environment. And every material lends itself to that in a different way. And other things like you sort of mentioned, sustainability, cost for buildings, energy cost, all that have an impact as well. But I would hope as architects we're not allowing that to necessarily take away from beauty, but figuring out how to harness that and allow it to be beautiful. For instance, one of the things I think sustainability has done a wonderful job with is it's brought a lot of warmth back into our buildings. Buildings are using wood materials because they're more sustainable than some of the plastics and metals and glasses and stuff like that are out there. And granted, those are all have variations of sustainability, but from a wood standpoint, if we manage our forest properly, we can have a continued supply of wood. And so we're seeing more mass timber structures going up. Those structures on the inside are bringing that wood is bringing warmth back to that interior environment. The other things we're looking at is how to manage the surrounding spaces of the building. So how do we manage water? How do we manage rain? How do we manage that sort of natural environment outside our spaces? And we're seeing a lot more attention paid to sort of, well, it's that landscape architecture end of design that is being incorporated not only on the sites, but we're starting to see that come into the buildings again. And so I'd like to think that sustainability is one of those things that is bringing some beauty back um, to some of the what some people might perceive as a colder environments of the modernism period that sometimes it had. And not all modernism was cold, but some of it was cold. We went through the brutalist period where we were playing around with concrete. I happen to think those concrete buildings are beautiful, but some people find them very, very cold, very stout. They don't necessarily attract people in, but architecture is also about how you take a material and work with it artistically, and it all has its place.
Let's imagine we're 100 years from now and looking back on this last 50 years of design. I, how would you describe it?
That's another interesting question. I don't think we're allowed to name our own period. I don't know that for sure. What period are we in? We've went through the Victorian period, the Gothic periods, the Romanesque, the classical. Then we went through modernism and postmodernism, and what are we in today? And I'm sure there are scholars in the university world that play around with these terms, and I don't know what the future is going to say about what we've done. I do hope that when all is said and done, they they're able to look back on the work that at least I've been able to do and had a chance to do, and feel like there was a sense of purpose and grace in the design work that I've been privileged to be part of. And not everything you do is a brand new building. To be honest with you, in today's society, I live here and work here in Michigan. We don't need all new buildings. We have a lot of old building stock that architects are dealing with. We can we can impose that beauty on those spaces that we're sort of reevaluating how they can be purposeful to society. And to me, that is beauty, and providing that sense of renewed purpose for a structure that might not have a purpose anymore because technology or society has moved beyond what its original purpose was. So I I hope that in the future they look back and say, we were going through a transition, technology, sustainability, energy, and we were working to find that sense of purpose and grace for architecture.
I have a little more complicated version, but in any case, the loss of talented craftsmen make it difficult to design complexity in, say, wood. Can't do it, can't afford it. I don't know if it's a good or a bad. I think it's sort of plain in our architecture now. Uh, but I do think CAD CAM allowed a mechanism they now work with, and it's replaced a lot of things. Slide rule's been replaced. A different sense of architecture too. Has that ever appealed to you, except for speed and efficacy?
Let me address what you first mentioned there because you are absolutely correct that um, our 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 craftsmen have changed, and there still are craftsmen out there, but like so many industries, I think even the construction world has struggled to find individuals to want to come in and learn the trades, and that is something that, as an industry, we've really been working on. Is bringing young people back into the trades and want to become those craftsmen. We do a lot of historic preservation in our company, and so there are those craftsmen out there that can restore those buildings, that understand those details that need to be done. But the other point to what you're suggesting is it takes the architectural mind as well to first create the details that we need craftsmen for. And there used to be a saying that the architect was the master builder. That has gone away. And when young people, whenever I have a chance to speak to any young people, especially if they're still in the secondary school program or system, I encourage them if their school, and this isn't offered as much anymore, but if your school offers any type of shop classes, get involved. Learn woodworking, learn metalworking, learn those things because ultimately you're going to be designing stuff and detailing it. And if you don't understand how those materials work and what you can do with them, you're never going to be able to explain that to a carpenter or a craftsman that has to build from your drawings. So that is hugely important. And when you don't understand them, you don't really know what you can do with them. And so I do understand what you're saying. There has been an evolution in that end of our industry. And it is something we are very aware of. And we are working with the construction industry to really resolve those voids that are in our industry.
It's just interesting as I kind of process what you're saying. Since my hobby is residential architecture, I love looking at houses, all like that. Um, but I do find fabrication is often not very good, you know, and not doesn't last, and the workmen don't care. But every once in a while, you do get a good group. And I'm thinking, I'm working around to a question. If you don't have the tradesmen right, and there's economic pressure, what does that allow? And sustainability is your guide, so to speak. Um, where do you find areas to be creative in?
You know, architecture is always, or well, for the past several decades, has always been to be an architect. A small percentage of your efforts, a small percentage of your time is really going to be in that what most people think of as your creative work, your design time. My typical week, if I work 50 hour week, 5 to 10% of that is in design work. The rest of it is in a number of other things. But a big chunk of that is in detailing. So, going back to what we were talking about, if we come up with a unique design, a unique element on a building, the way we want to sort of deal with sort of positive and negative space and form, we can, that's sort of the design end of things. That's the artistic end. But then how do you take that, something you created, and be able to detail it in such a way that you can explain to a contractor how to construct it? That is another level of talent and creativity that is needed to do that. That's where I'm suggesting kids need to get involved with working with their hands if they want to be an architect so that they know how to do this job. And it might not be in school. Maybe it's going to work for a contractor for a couple of years before you start architectural school. But it's figuring out and understanding how those materials go together and then taking the time to care about those details enough to make sure that we're explaining that in our documents, our construction documents, our drawings. Many people still call them blueprints that we issue to
That's
the
right. I understand the word purpose and location and north, south, east, west and elevation and things like that. But I don't know too much about, or what I read, architects talking about how they want the space to make you feel or feel in connection with another space. And is that part of your work at all? Your thinking?
It is. And, that's one of those things that years ago somebody once told me it takes till you're 40 years old before you become a good architect. Well, I've passed that a long time ago. and I still feel like I'm learning. As we went back to that myriad of constraints that is on you as an architect, and the process of architecture is very circuitous, right? It's not a straight line. We don't have an assembly line where at one end we have a raw material and at the other end we know what we're going to spit out. Our process is about exploration, testing that exploration, seeing how it resolves itself, and then maybe scrapping it and starting that again. Or how can we evolve that and take it to the next level? And it's a continued learning process. As an architect, as I go through that process, um, for me, it actually took me several years in my career before I understood. A lot of people ask themselves, why do you do what you do? And it took me going through that very circuitous process a few times with clients, real clients, not just at school, not at home sketching, buildings and houses and floor plans as a kid, but working with real clients before I truly started to understand how what I wanted to do was impact the human race, how my space can make a difference. Architectural space can do a lot of things. I'm not going to tell you it can heal illnesses. I'm not going to tell you it can resolve psychological issues, but we sure can hurt those things if we do our space wrong. And we should be able to provide a space that encourages health, encourages both mental and physical health, I should say, and encourages, connection with other people. And that is really where my purpose lies today in a lot of what I do. That when I say purpose, how is it connecting back with the individual and the community and making those stronger? As architects, we have the privilege to design spaces that the human race will generally be in from the day they're born to the day they die. And that is an awe-inspiring thought process as an individual when you think about it for a moment. Um, and to think that I don't want people to have to pass through or exist in a space that I had anything to do with that really doesn't add to their life and their well being.
Do you think the height of the architect influences the volume of the space? That his or her level of comfort being 5'2" versus 6'2" changes their instincts or their product?
That is a great question. I've never been asked that before or even contemplated that completely. As I told you, continually learning as an architect. I will tell you what I do oftentimes, though, and this was taught to me at a very young age as a young apprentice, is when you have a new project at the onset. Personally, one of the things I do is I go and I just exist in that space. If it's a new building on a brand new site, I might go and sit in the field that the building and the site's gonna be developed, that is gonna be developed for that architecture. I might go into an existing building that we're gonna renovate and just walk around, stand and sit, because I do want to perceive that space from different perspectives. And I just take time to understand whether there's a structure there or not. What is the site giving to us? So, as an architect, as a designer, you're trying to understand what you're being given to start with. At least that's what I'm trying to do. Where's my starting point? I'm not trying to impose something on a site that doesn't want to really be there. I want to understand what I'm being given. And so whether it's a vertical height issue or just a perception of those elements around you, whether it's natural or man-made, how does it have an impact on it?
Would you ever tell a client that it isn't a good place for their house or addition or renovation and they should be someplace else?
We have had conversations about location on sites. Yes, the short answer to that is yes, I would. I do believe it's my job. I believe a client hires me for my expertise. And I've been doing this a long time. And I've learned a lot of things. And now a client ultimately has the right to make a decision on how to proceed forward. But I do believe it's my job to be able to bring to them the perspectives, whether they're in there's something that align with their initial goals or they don't, and be able to say, this is what I think you should consider.
Is there any interest in protecting clients at this point from 5G or some of these other things you can't see but are all around us?
That hasn't been talked about a lot on the things that I've worked on. It's an interesting thought of what we should be protecting people of. We think of those things like hazardous materials, like lead paint and asbestos, things that again were things we used in architecture years ago, and we don't today because we learned from them. Some of these things you're talking about, like some of these electromagnetic waves and stuff that are around us in so many devices, we may be learning that these have an impact on us and we have to remove them from the spaces which we exist. And we'll have to deal with that at some point if that's what we do learn from that.
So do you decide your walls with a little give interior space in case you have to add anything, or is that too much of a future consideration or an expense?
It could be a lot of expense. I can tell you that in some cases, when we're dealing with hospital work and healthcare work, we figure how to incorporate those things into walls to protect the patients and the healthcare workers from some of the things that are in those environments, from X-ray rooms and stuff like that. So that is happening in today's world with things that we know are hazardous.
Thank you, Paul. Our time has come to say goodbye, as they say, but I hope sometime we'll have a chance to continue on a subject we both share an admiration of.
To contact Junia, send her an email at juniadonsthespark@gmail.com. For more information, program schedules, and news about future guests, go to www.juniadonthespark.com. Thank you for joining us. See you next time on Junia Doan's The Spark.
Local productions seen on Delta College Public Media are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.